This is Jeff Amrine. This is the Startup Junkies podcast. This is about those stories for the people that are afflicted with creating the next great products and services that are going to change lives, not just in America, but worldwide. We're going to tell the stories of the next great beer producer. We'll tell stories of new product and apparel makers. We're going to tell the stories of those people that don't accept the status quo and that want to make things better. Welcome to the Startup Junkies podcast.
Okay, we are live for another episode of the Startup Junkies podcast. My name is Michael Eisman, and I have the pleasure of sitting down with the one and only Dr. Jeff Standridge for the Startup Junkies podcast.
You know, you're the only one that calls me that.
Dr. Jeff Standridge?
Yeah.
No, someone else called you that today and reminded me you Dr. Jeff Standridge.
Okay, there are two people.
Okay, all right. Hey, Bryden. Bryden, our peanut gallery here, was referring to you as... he was asking us how we know the difference between the two Jeffs, Jeff Amrine and Jeff Standridge. And he referred to you as Dr. Standridge 3 or 4 times in a row.
I got you.
And
I keep telling him to call me Jeff.
Yeah.
He's working on it. It's an acquired skill.
Yeah. Looks like he's doing pretty good. He's doing all right. So the first time we had you on the podcast was exactly 1 year ago.
It sure was.
We were down here for the Health Sciences Boot Camp, and we're here for round 2 of that. One thing that you told me then that we've talked about since, it was a quote that seemingly small actions consistently applied
over
yield
time,
massive results.
Seemingly small actions consistently applied over time yield massive results.
Yeah.
It's called the compound effect.
Yeah.
Yep.
That one stuck with me a lot.
Tell me about that.
Well, so if you have intake 100 more calories than you output every day, then over time, that's going to yield some massive results on the scale. But if you output a little bit more than you intake every day, then that's going to be good. And so I've slimmed down a little bit and was able to get a sub 4-hour marathon.
There you have it.
And I think that I owe you like at least 98% of the credit for that.
Of course.
Yeah.
And the other 2% goes to whom? No, I'm kidding.
Yeah.
Well, that's good. Yeah. I mean, it's a huge factor in my own life, and I can't take full credit for it. Obviously, we've talked about compounding interest, which is where the concept comes from. Darren Hardy, publisher of Success Magazine, wrote the book, The Compound Effect, where he articulates several examples using the 100 calorie example that you talked about. 3,500 calories equal a pound of body fat. So in 35 days of being in excess 100 calories a day, in 35 days, you're going to put on a pound, roughly a month, right? So in a year, you're going to put on 12 pounds. In 2 years, you're going to put on 24 pounds. And 5 years out, you're 125 pounds heavier than what you wanted to be.
Yeah. That's the overtime part of that.
That's the overtime, consistently applied. And the other thing that's interesting about the compound effect is the compound effect's always working. It's either working for you or it's working against you.
Yeah.
Right? And it's up to us to decide whether we want to harness it toward us versus it pulling us in a direction we don't want to go.
And right before we came on, you said you've been trying intermittent fasting.
Yeah.
As I was getting our mic levels here, I asked you what you had for breakfast. You said nothing. How long have you been applying intermittent fasting?
I started it January the 3rd. So I had a little bit of weight I needed to lose. I've got some back issues. I do like to work out, and mostly running, mostly aerobic. I'm not a big, as you can tell, I'm not a huge weight lifter.
Would have never guessed.
Yeah. But I needed to lose a little bit of weight, and I'd heard about the intermittent fasting, not just from a weight loss perspective, but from a cell rejuvenation perspective, that it creates healthier cells. It allows the weaker cells to die off. And so there's been some research out there on it, and there are multiple ways to do it. And the way I have chosen is to have a feeding period and a fasting period every day. The feeding period is from about noon until 6 or 7 o'clock. I try to be finished by 7. Of course, last night was not able to be. Several nights this week was not able to be. But if I, generally have a 17 to 18 hour fasting period where I consume only a little bit of coffee and maybe some tea.
Yeah. That's so I've actually been trying it for the last 6 months.
Oh, yeah?
And so one thing that I've realized is that you can't, like, if last night. So we
socialized.
Yeah, socializing. If you give yourself a break and you're not so strict, then it's a lot easier once you do kind of get off to come back on versus completely falling off the wagon because you were so strict on something.
Absolutely. One of the reasons that I like it is, there are some people who will do intermittent fasting, like they'll go for a period of time and then they'll do a 3-day fast or a 60-hour fast or whatever. I just like having the same feeding period and the same fasting period every single day.
Yeah.
Now, Sundays I fall off the wagon occasionally. My mom cooks Sunday lunch every Sunday. And so, but the first, I'd say 45 days that I did it or so, I was rigid. During my fasting period, I only.
You sound like much more of an animal when you have a feeding period.
I know.
You might need to change the vocabulary a little bit.
It is kind of
but,
animalistic.
yeah.
But anyway, during my feeding period, I would have.
Don't you kind of feel like a lion though?
I am a lion.
But like the way that they just eat, like a whole antelope.
Yeah.
And I think
that's kind of what I do on Sundays when my mom cooks. Is I eat like an antelope.
When then you see them on National Geographic, they've got just this giant bellies after a feeding period, and then they go on a fasting period too, and they hunt. And so, I think you're a little bit sharper when you're in that fasting period.
Yeah,
because I don't know if it's like the way we evolved, where we're like looking for that next meal, and you've got to be sharp to get it. But it's kind of cool. You got your lion-like feeding period.
There you have it. I have no idea where I was going with that, but
I totally derailed you. Well, okay, so I'll fill in with two more things, and then let's talk about you more. So one was Kyle Tabor, Blue Sail Coffee founder. He was the one who really got me onto intermittent fasting. Talked about it a lot, and I'd been thinking about it, and then and part of the way I understand the cell rejuvenation is that if you're constantly eating, your body's not in a fasted state, then it doesn't give your organs a time to not be essentially processing food and nutrients and kind of work on themselves, clean themselves out, and rejuvenate your cells there. And I know that there's plenty of people here at the Health Sciences Bootcamp that could give a much more articulate and I don't know. They know the anatomy a lot better.
Ellen Bruni and I were talking about this just the other day. Over lunch, ironically, during a feeding period,
right?
But when I first started it, January the 3rd, for 45 days or so, I was rigid. I only had black coffee and unsweetened tea during my.
And black coffee doesn't break a fast.
That's right.
Right.
And I watched very carefully what I ate during my feeding period. And then once I got the weight down to where I wanted it, I just had a few pounds.
You're looking good.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Once I got the weight down to where I wanted it, then I started putting a little bit of cream back in my coffee, a little bit of creamer, not watching as much what I eat in the evenings. But I've been able to maintain and I feel better and clearly look better. And
I think we got a picture before we started here. So, and also the other inspiration for really sticking with it was I heard Terry Crews do an interview. So Terry Crews is former NFL player, actor. He's the guy who can like make his pec stance.
That's right. He was on our campus, the University of Central Arkansas, a month ago, 6 weeks ago or so. Yeah.
So ultimate like bodybuilder. And he talked about the last 5 years he's been doing intermittent fasting. And I was like, no way. So I had heard it enough places. I tried to apply it and it's been working well. So that's not the only thing you do. You do a lot of other things. You've put out 2 books recently. You are Chief Catalyst of the Conductor, and you're involved in Cadron Creek Capital Partners, or Cadron Capital Partners, and the Cadron Creek Fund. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about all of the different activities that you have? And I want to kind of understand the why behind it, and then how you're so productive.
Well, about 2008, I was an executive at Axiom. We went through a private equity period where we were looking to take on private equity and go back private again. And the deal fell through middle of the summer. Stock dropped to $6 a share. Of course, being an executive there for, I guess at that time, almost about 10 years, 12 years, watching a fairly sizable nest egg dwindle down to, on paper, to
a lot of your compensation was in company stock.
Yeah. And so I decided to begin investing in outside companies, outside the market and outside the company. And so I started looking for some local opportunities to invest in where I could physically touch those companies, and acquired an insurance agency called American Safeguard Insurance. That's here in Conway. We have about 14 agents, and I don't sell insurance, but I'm the chairman of ASI, and I'm responsible for strategy, business development, what have you. Have two very strong operating partners that run that business. A few years later, invested in a large automotive service center here in town with a couple of family members, and I have probably my longest form of investments have been in the areas of real estate. A couple of dozen properties, build a few houses, flip a few houses, some rental properties that are ongoing properties, and I have another operating partner. On all those instances, there are operating partners that are operating those businesses. So I'm more involved from a strategic level, chairman kind of level, strategy level, what have you. And then, of course,
level at some
capital level at some point. That's right. My real value, I think, is in the deal structure and in the business development, the operational business development once the company's has been acquired or invested in. So having had the opportunity to do that with Axiom on 5 continents, starting companies in Poland and China and Brazil and the Middle East, it's a little easier.
Okay, can you talk about that just a little bit more?
Yeah,
you said that pretty casually.
Well, I
starting companies on 5 continents.
Well,
how many people
being
in the world
involved
do you
in
think have
companies on
done
5? So I went to Europe in 2003 to integrate 21 companies that we had acquired in 7 countries. And a few years later, went to Poland and built a company. We scaled to about 350 people, and we built it from the ground up, hired the staff, negotiated the incentives with the government, built out a facility, and grew it to about 350 people. Soon after we did that, went to China and did the same thing, grew it to about 150, I guess. And then the next 2 were acquisitions, where we acquired one in the Middle East, and I ran it for about 18 months, and then one in Brazil, where we ran it for about 3 years. So having done that and doing that, 2/3 of your time remotely, 1/3 of your time on site, it's kind of difficult, of course, but the things I learned were transferable to other things. And when you're able to walk into the business on a daily basis that you've invested in, or you're able to pick up the phone and call someone, and within an hour you can be face to face, it's a much easier process. And so that's, I kind of picked up that bug, I guess, when I was working with Axiom. And so I've invested in a number of companies. Of course, we started Cadron Creek Capital, which you mentioned. Cadron Creek Capital was the first venture fund that I had co-founded. And we've invested in about 15 companies. So a few of those companies I sit on the boards of. And now, of course, Jeff, Brett Amaran, and I are working on Cadron Capital Partners, which will be one of the largest early stage venture funds investing in the state of Arkansas. And
the first time you were on, we talked a little bit about kind of your decision to leave Axiom and get plugged into the venture ecosystem here as a more hands-on role with the Conductor as well. Could you give us an update on what the Conductor is doing and some of the health sciences boot camp as well? Sure.
So the Conductor, as you know, but we'll tell the listeners, is a public-private partnership between Startup Junkie and the University of Central Arkansas. And I consider you all and the Amarans, our business partners in that regard.
I consider you family.
Well, and that's even closer. That's right. I appreciate you saying that. I love you, man.
Love you too.
And so we can really get off track really quickly, can't we?
I need to stop.
No, that's fine. You point the way and I follow behind. So anyway,
so let's go. Yeah, Conductor.
Yep. So we have Kim Lane, who serves as the CEO of the Conductor, does a fine job providing overall leadership. Keaton Ramsey, who's in the room with us, is our program's lead. Jason Huselton is our master maker down at the UCA Makerspace. So very, very strong partnership with President Davis and the Board of Trustees. While it's a partnership with UCA, it sits outside the academic areas, but we work very closely with the academic colleges. And we do talent development, a lot of K-12 and college level talent development. We do a lot of entrepreneurial development, working with existing entrepreneurs, aspiring entrepreneurs, students, et cetera. Kind of as an offshoot of that, I've begun teaching a couple of courses at UCI. I teach entrepreneurial finance in the College of Business, and I teach a course that I created in the spring called Innovation Leadership, which is a graduate course. Had about a half a dozen students, both MBAs and PhD students, and we followed the entrepreneurial process there in helping each of those students find innovations to effect. But we're running the Health Sciences Boot Camp here now. We've got a brand camp this summer with middle school kids. I spend the vast majority of my time doing one-on-one coaching, consulting, mentoring with entrepreneurs and aspiring entrepreneurs. But the Health Sciences Bootcamp is what we have going on right now that you're all involved with. And we have 17 campers, upper-level college students from 10 different colleges and universities. And they have been working all week long exploring and investigating the problems that are in healthcare and beginning now to start working on, after doing a bit of customer development, to identify the solutions that they want to pursue in that regard.
Well, your cadence of activity down here is incredible. And there's just been an awesome community built around the conductor and this entrepreneurial ecosystem. As you look forward 5 to 10 years, there's a lot of effort that you're putting in and your incredible team down here is putting into growing the entrepreneurial ecosystem. What does success look like? What are you measuring for or working towards in a 5 to 10 years down the road? Why is this important to you and then the conductor as a whole?
So let's come back to why it's important to me, if we can, because I want to spend a little bit of time on that. But let's talk about the success of the conductor. You guys have been doing this kind of work in Northwest Arkansas as Startup Junkie for almost a decade. And I've said this multiple times before, much of the entrepreneurial ecosystem across the state of Arkansas has some form of Jeff Amarine's and Startup Junkie's thumbprint on it. And so I think the conductor is absolutely part of that legacy as well. If I were to look at what we're really looking to produce in the longer term is we want to have a more vibrant entrepreneurial culture. We want to have folks who, we've got 3 institutions of higher education with University of Central Arkansas, Hendrix, Central Baptist College. We probably have 50,000 college students within a 50-mile radius of here. We have 2 very large employers in the form of the former Hewlett-Packard facility, which is now DXC and Insight, Axiom Corporation with 1,800 employees or so. We should be spinning out more startup activity in Central Arkansas, and we have capital that can be deployed, and we've proven that with Cadron Creek Capital. So if I were to look out, I'd say 5 years down the road, we have an innovation center that's sitting somewhere in downtown Conway. We have companies that we have helped to start here using the base of talent that we have that are growing and are receiving outside investment. We have companies that we have gone outside the state and recruited in here because of the space that we have available, say in an innovation center, because of the entrepreneurial support programming that we have through the Conductor and Startup Junkie, and because of the capital that we have now with Cadron Capital Partners. We had the opportunity to meet with the governor just a couple of weeks ago, and those are the 3 legs of the stool that we said now for the first time across the state. If you think about it, we've got the Little Rock Tech Park in Little Rock space, the Arnold Innovation Center, which we will have in Conway. We have the Exchange in Northwest Arkansas. We have the entrepreneurial support organizations in Innovate Arkansas, the Venture Center, Arkansas Regional Innovation Hub, Conductor, Startup Junkie, et cetera. And now with Cadron Capital Partners, we will have the funds to actually go and entice those companies to move into the state of Arkansas to take advantage of those things, but also to organically grow those startups or spawn those startups from within. That's the vision that I have.
So this capital component, obviously there's the just return is one aspect of it, but what do you think about the community investing in the companies that are growing and creating these jobs and creating new revenue around there? Having investors in the community have ownership in that brand, why is that an important aspect of that? Because the investors then can open doors for them and can celebrate in the success of the company, or is it more on the return side?
So it's both and, right? I mean, if you don't return, if you don't generate a return for your investors, then you won't have future investors. They'll do it once, and then they won't invest again. So you've got to generate the return. You can't lose track of the fact that we have to generate a return for our investors. But one of the stated goals of Cadron Creek Capital was to elevate the investment acumen of our community. 2/3 of our fund had physicians, company CEOs, and other folks who had the means but had never invested in an alternative investment before. So by doing that, we were able to elevate the investment acumen. But also, it wasn't just about money and returns. It was about pulling together a group of investors who had collective expertise that we could actually assist the companies in which we invested. We could assist them to grow, open doors, make connections, what have you for them. So it's all of the above.
Yeah. So why is it important to you?
Well, that goes back to a deeper question of, and whether I'm talking about sales or leadership or what have you, is everybody has a why. And I like to say that everybody has a calling, a personal calling for which they were individually created. And it's not something that you create, it's something you discover. And for some people, their calling and their vocation are the same thing. Their vocation is their calling. They wake up every day and they put 2 feet on the floor and they go to work and they earn their living fulfilling their calling. My wife was a nurse practitioner. My daughters are nurses, teachers, counselors, pastors, what have you. For some people, and I put myself in the second category, their vocation supports their calling. They get up every day and the work that they do enables them to fulfill their calling. It provides financial resources for them to fulfill their calling. It provides a platform for them to fulfill their calling. It provides a combination of the two. And I put myself in that latter category. And I'd say in my early 40s, so approximately 10 or 15 years ago, maybe my late 30s, I began to understand that my calling had to do with creating new insights that lead people to better ways of living and working. And I didn't create that. That's what people would tell me. I would teach a course on leadership. I would teach a Sunday school class. I would counsel a group of employees about a business problem we were facing, and started hearing from people repetitively that you make me think differently. You make me consider things that I've never considered before. So when I began to frame that up as to what I felt like I was good at and what I was called to do, then it made me look at my work completely differently. I was pretty sure that my calling was not selling consumer data to companies looking to target consumers for marketing purposes. I was pretty sure that that wasn't my calling, but that's what I did every day. But when I figured out what my calling was by listening to people who told me what they observed that I was good at, I began to look at my work differently, because Axiom created a platform for me to lead hundreds of people over the course of 20 years where I could fulfill that calling. And I tell people that when I left Axiom 18 months ago, it's not because it ceased to be a good platform, but a better one emerged. And that better one is the Conductor and Cadron Capital Partners and the things that I'm involved in now.
And so in this last 18 months, you've published 2 books, written and published 2 books. And could you talk a little bit about those books? And then you don't seem to just dip your toe into anything. You dive full in. And so you've been doing this entrepreneurial ecosystem building work full time, or after leaving Axiom for 18 months, and you and Jeff Amrine are starting on a book together too. So give us a teaser on the new book and what the other 2 books have been.
So it's kind of a long story, but I have a connection to a former senior executive with Thomas Nelson Publishers, which is one of the largest publishing companies in the world, and I wrote a book about 13 years ago now, 12 years ago, with a pastor friend of mine, and we shopped it with Thomas Nelson. Couldn't really get any traction. We were couple of unknowns, and so we self-published it, and it ended up being picked up by a publisher in Australia. And this gentleman left Thomas Nelson and started his own publishing company called Fitting Words Publisher. And he stayed on me for a few years about, why don't you write a leadership book? So when I left Axiom, he approached me and said, well, now will you write the leadership book? And I said, yeah, let's do that. So fall of 2016, I started on a leadership book. And about 40,000 words into that 60 or 70,000 word project, he said, wait a minute. All of your social media, speaking of jumping in with both feet, all of your social media is pointing toward innovation, entrepreneurship, investing, and those kinds of things. Why don't we just hit pause on the leadership book? And why don't you tell us a little bit about innovation, entrepreneurship? And he knew that academically I'd been studying top performance for most of my both academic career and my actual leadership career. So we decided to write the Innovators Field Guide, which we call Accelerators for Innovators, Entrepreneurs, and Leaders. And we published that in November, early December, and really liked that process. It's an easy read. It's the book is meant to have 52 accelerators in it, which could be done one per week, or 2 a week for 6 months, 3 a week for 4 months, 4 a week for 3 months, however quickly the reader wants to read.
And they're short.
They're short. Every title or every chapter has 4 basic elements. It's got a title that's not meant to tell them a lot, more intriguing. It's got a quote that kind of unpacks the title a little bit. Then there's a 350 to 500 word reading that can generally be done in about 5 minutes. And then there are 3 or 4 questions of reflection, action, consideration, what have you. And what I get from people who've read the book and the Amazon reviews and others is that that's where the power lies. It's in those questions at the end. And so what I counsel folks to do is to take one, no more than every 3 to 5 days. Take one, read it, contemplate on it, spend a little time with it, put it down, then come back to it 2 or 3 days later and actually spend some time on those questions. And
you mentioned Amazon. Can they find it on Amazon?
They can find it on Amazon.
On the top seller list, right?
Interestingly, yeah, it hit bestseller soon after it came out, the Innovators Field Guide. And then it hit bestseller again when the Top Performers Field Guide came out, because they both hit in the same week. They both hit number 1 in their category.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
It's pretty awesome.
Completely blown
Yeah.
away. Completely blown away. And the second one is called the Top Performers Field Guide. And it is very similar in format. Actually, it's identical in format. But instead of the considerations of innovation, it deals with more individual top performance and leadership top performance, which has been kind of a passion of mine for a long time.
And so I want to get into productivity, and there's a few things I still want to talk about, but your productivity just in general. And last night we talked a little bit about your writing style and how you were able to be productive. And that, could you kind of overview your writing style? And
well, the best way I have found to go about it,
and kind of like how you avoid writer's block as well.
So I like to architect out what I'm going to write, kind of outline form, if you will, and then identify the questions that I'm looking to answer or that I think need to be answered in each of those major topic areas. And then that gives me a variety of things that can be written about at any given time. If I'm blocking on one particular subject, I can go to another subject and answer those questions, or another section, if you will. And so writing for me is not a linear process. Even though I'm a linear thinker, it's not really a linear process. The other key is to have a really good editor, and someone who can take raw writing, which I consider anything that I do to be pretty raw, and can make it look and sound a lot better than what I can do on my own, and can provide some critical feedback to it and what have you. So that's really kind of.
And so for your editor, do you have a professional editor, or do you have a group of people that you like
I work with the publisher who has a team of folks that work with me, from cover design to page layout to editing and research validation and those things.
And could you give a teaser on the upcoming book?
Well, Jeff and I have just been talking about this, and we think that there is a need to extract out of all of the people of Startup Junkie, Conductor, and perhaps even others, the major components that go into building out an entrepreneurial ecosystem. We think that for the first time, well, not for the first time, but more so than ever before, communities are talking about building an entrepreneurial ecosystem, encouraging and fostering entrepreneurship and innovation and what have you. And just, we've seen it with Conductor and Startup Junkie, the number of communities that are asking us to come and talk to them about it. The reputation that I think Startup Junkie has created, that the Conductor has continued, and we have that collective expertise across the entire team. And we have a network of folks to whom we could reach out to plug in areas where we would want to plug in. And so we haven't started on it yet. We're in the concept stage, very early stage, if you will, pre-seed funding. We're kind of in the friends, family, and fools stage right now. But we're beginning to architect what we think it might look like.
So with writing books, all the work that you're doing in the community and in all of your other ventures that you have at least a somewhat active role in, you still seem to be interested in new opportunities, have the time to sit down and be present and, record a podcast or work through someone's, business issues. I connected you with a friend of mine from California, and 4 minutes later you responded to the email, and then Saturday morning you hopped on the phone to give him some advice, some sales advice as he was interviewing for a job, which he did get. So thank you for that.
Absolutely.
You always seem to have time and be able to say yes, but you also follow up with everything that you're doing as well. So how do you do it?
Well, I will be the first to tell you that it looks better on the outside than it does if you're just around me every single day. It can get a little sloppy occasionally. You can ask Keaton or Kim, where they've had to ask me for something a time or two, and I say, hold me accountable for that. Hold me accountable. I just think I think we sell ourselves too short sometimes in not believing we can do any more than we do. And I don't buy into that. I think that seemingly small actions consistently applied over time yield massive results, even when those small actions are diverse actions across a variety of different things. So I like to push the boundaries. I like to challenge myself in that regard. If you really want to know, I think it comes back to that calling. I'm having a fantastic time doing all the things that I'm doing. And I feel like where I excel are in those areas where I am in tune with my calling. I'm doing what it is I feel like I was created to do. And I don't know that I've found the capacity on that yet. Where we reach our capacity many times is when we have too many things in our lives that really aren't meaningful to us or aren't in tune with whom we're really created to be and do and what have you. If we can find that, I think it opens up an entire untapped area of capacity that perhaps we haven't seen before.
So if you're evaluating new opportunities or areas to invest your time, it's not as much how much effort is this going to take? Is this in line with my calling?
First and foremost, is it in line with my calling? Is it, there are a lot of great things to do. I've always said strategic plans for companies should tell you more about what you're not going to do than they are about what you are going to do. Unfortunately, with strategic plans, we try to just capture everything that's currently going on so everybody feels like they're part of the strategic plan, and we don't really use it as a measuring stick. Well, a calling is kind of like an individual strategic plan, and it should tell us as much about what we're not going to do as it does about what we are going to do. And if we're in tune with that, then we can say no to certain things that don't seem to fit within that. And so I do say no. I do say no to a number of things. Sometimes it grieves me to do that because the popular thing would be to say yes to it, but I know that my heart's not going to be in it. I'm not going to do a good job, and it's not really in line with who I really feel like I'm called to be and do, even though it's a good, worthwhile endeavor. I have to say, I just don't feel like I would be the right person for that.
Yeah. I haven't followed them as much as I would like to, but I wrote down some criteria for whether or not I say yes or no to a new opportunity. And one of them that I can relate with you on is that if it's not a hell yes, like if you're not all in, then say no,
right.
Because if you don't, then your actions will say no later,
Sure.
and you'll let people down. And
I hate to let people down.
Yeah.
I hate to let people down.
So, how do you structure a week with all of these different activities going on? So, I mean, you say you have endless capacity, or you haven't reached your capacity yet, but there's only a certain number of hours in the week. And, so yeah, how do you look at that?
Well, I am heavily dependent on calendar. So everything goes in my calendar. And it's on my phone, it's on my iPad, it's on my laptop, and it is the gospel relative to my time allocation. Kim and I sat down I'd say 6 months into the conductor when we realized that we were both doing a lot of the same things, and there were certain things that she was far, far better at than I. And there may be some things that I had the experience to do from more complex business situations than she, even though she does a great job with many of those one-on-one consulting engagements. And I have some of the connections for fundraising for whether it's our fund over at the UCA Foundation or if it's for Cadron Capital or what have you. So we sat down and we actually got on the whiteboard and we started divvying out responsibilities based upon what we felt like our strengths were and where we thought we could best contribute. And I'd say 80%, maybe even 90% of it was unique to each of us. And then we acknowledged the 10% or the 15% or however much that was kind of overlapping that either of us could do. And we just kind of took primary and secondary on that. Okay, I'll be primary on this and you be primary on that. And that had a huge effect on making sure that with all the work that needed to be done, we didn't have each of us duplicating the other's efforts. We could divide and conquer. And so I think that's planning. It's really about planning. It's they say the master skill of achievement is goal setting and action planning. And if that goal setting and action planning is tied with where you ultimately want to go in the first place, then it makes it that much more meaningful. So I take business folks through. And we did this with the 10X Accelerator. I did mention that a few moments ago. We have that going on as well, which is an accelerator of existing small businesses and startup companies. And we took them through what we call their one-page growth plan. And it's a cascade. What are your mission, vision, values? What were you created to be as a company? What's the vision of your company? In other words, where do you want to be 3 or 5 years down the road? Let's call it 3 years down the road. And then what are the values, are the guardrails within which you're going to operate in order to fulfill that mission and achieve that vision? And then if your vision is 3 years out, then what are the things that do you want to accomplish within those 3 years? And if you're going to accomplish those 5 things, then what do you need to focus on in order to do that? And if that's where you want to be in 3 years and the things you're going to need to accomplish in 3 years to achieve the vision, then what do you have to do over the next 12 months to get a third of the way there?
Is that how you look at goal setting across a lot of different areas? It's more of a linear step-by-step. This is...
Yeah, I call it a top to bottom cascade or a top down cascade, so you can manage your time and efforts from the bottom up.
Okay.
And so you cascade it down. Here's the big picture vision. Here's what I need to achieve in the next 3 years. Here's what I need to focus on to do that. Here's what I need to achieve at least a third of that in the next 12 months. Here's what I've got to focus on there. And then here are the key performance indicators that I'm going to look at on a weekly basis, monthly basis in order to make sure that my economic engine is tuned, so to speak.
Okay. Could you tell me a little bit about who 30-year-old Jeff Standridge was and maybe what advice you would give him today?
30-year-old Jeff Standridge was a professor at UAMS, was just really getting started on his application of the finer elements of top performance to his career, the elements of leadership to his career. And then the 32-year-old Jeff Standridge was walking out of healthcare and academic healthcare to join Axiom Corporation in 1998 and was given the amazing opportunity to put that academic knowledge to actual work in a publicly traded company. So that's who I was at that time. I was a neophyte, if you will, in the space. I had a lot of head knowledge. I had a lot of academic knowledge, but I was just embarking on the journey to actually put it into action. And within 5 years, I was putting it into action on multiple continents. And it was, I can't describe the amazing impact that it had on me, both personally and professionally and what have you. I was, as I started out, I would say that, so you've heard me talk about results and relationships. The difference between top 1% performers and middle 50% performers are the degree to which they balance results and relationships. Those are really the two macro levers, if you will. Well, I'm a results guy. And so inherent in someone who is so focused on delivering results, there are opportunities to alienate relationships along the way. The 32-year-old Jeff Standridge was that person.
And what did he score on the empathy test?
I knew you were going to bring that up.
Yeah.
Jeff Standridge didn't have a lot of empathy at the age of 32.
So if it was, say it's a scale of 1 to 100 on an empathy test.
He would score about a 6 or a 7.
Like exactly a 6?
Exactly a 6.
Okay.
He would score exactly a 6. And his wife would congratulate him on the 6 because she thought that it was considerably lower. So she thought he had overachieved on the test.
All right.
So that was the Jeff Standridge. Not empathetic, not really concerned about relationships as much as he was concerned about the results. And fortunately, he was surrounded by a number of very strong mentors who helped to put a mirror in front of him. Now, and those mentors weren't necessarily, hey, will you be my mentors? It was coworkers who were more seasoned and who had a little more life experience and who were not afraid to who invested in me to put that mirror up in front of me to let me see myself, which sometimes wasn't a very pretty picture. Yeah. And I won't say I have it all figured out, but I still have my very unempathetic tendencies sometimes. I'm still very results oriented. But I would like to say that the 52-year-old Jeff Standridge, soon to be, is a little more balanced on the results relationships continuum.
So would the advice to your 30-year-old self be look in the mirror more often, or surround yourself with people who are going to show you the mirror?
Once again, both and. Yeah. It would be surround yourself with people who will put the mirror up in front of you, but not just assume that they will do that. Ask them to do that. Give them the opportunity to do that. If you lead those people, if you are formally responsible for those people in a work setting, pull them into an office and close the door and say, when you're in this office and this door is closed, it is a safe place. Don't ever worry about how you give me feedback. Just give me the feedback. Don't let me do anything wrong. Don't let me alienate people. Make sure you help me understand how I might be coming across.
Because you understand those might be weaknesses,
yeah,
or things that you wouldn't be aware of.
That's exactly right.
And would you do that on like a 360 review level?
Sure.
So subordinates you would give you feedback as well?
Subordinates, peers, and superiors. Okay. A lot of people feel like that younger leaders many times feel that you can't demonstrate any weakness because when you do, other people will exploit that weakness. My experience has shown me that everyone has weaknesses. And it's when you are not aware of those weaknesses that they end up causing harm. When you are aware of them and you readily admit them and you surround yourself with people who can help stand in those gaps, seldom are those weaknesses exploited. Generally, they're grown, they're improved.
Mm-hmm. So, what advice do you think the 90-year-old Jeff would give you today?
90-year-old Jeff.
Provided he's still pretty coherent.
Yeah. He would probably give me advice to, I'll be honest. I mean, I'm extremely happy with my life. I'm extremely happy with my family relationships. Family is extremely important to me. My favorite thing to do is to hang out with my wife and daughters and soon to be son-in-law. And so my 90-year-old Jeff would probably tell me enjoy more of that now. My wife will tell you that she sees me about half of the amount of time that she did when I was fully employed. But when she does see me, my smile's twice as big.
Okay.
So, to me, that's a great trade-off.
Yeah.
So I'm having a great time right now. And so, 92-year-old Jeff would probably have said, you could have slowed down a little earlier, but I'm just not ready yet. I mean, I'm 52 years old or soon to be. And so I'd say, I've got a few more years of really beating the streets before I'm ready to slow down. But he would probably, I suspect 90-year-old Jeff would said, you could have slowed down a little bit.
Do you think when you have grandkids, that would be a tipping point to start slowing down?
It could be. Yeah. I suspect it will. Yeah. Don't know when that's going to be, though.
Right. So last question.
Mm-hmm.
What advice do you most often give to entrepreneurs that you meet with in one-on-one consulting? Or something that you would like them to understand?
I have yet to find a business book or a business course that will encourage entrepreneurs in earnest to discover their calling and or to figure out the personal why behind their entrepreneurial endeavors, to make that connection. Because starting a business is hard. Running a business is hard. And if you don't know what the personal connection is between why it's important for that business to be successful, then it's going to be much harder for you to overcome the obstacles that stand in the way. And it can be a financial incentive. It can be to provide opportunities for your family incentive. It can be to retire early incentive. It can be to take care of an ailing parent or grandparent incentive. Whatever that incentive is, to understand why that it is important for that business endeavor to be successful, and to
on a personal level, and draw that connection.
I believe that is one of the most important things, and most business schools don't teach it. Most business curriculum don't teach it. That's why in our one-page growth plan, we spend some time really doing that, to ask yourselves, what's the why? Mm-hmm. I keep pictures of my family on my wall in my office. That's a large portion of my why. My calling in my family, that's my why. And if I hit a brick wall or I experience failure, temporary failure, all I have to do is go right back to the why, and that failure or that temporary setback seems minuscule in comparison.
Well, I think that's a pretty good spot to end. Thank
right.
you. And if people want to keep up with what you're doing, find the books.
Books are on Amazon, so you can Amazon search just Jeff Standridge or Jeff D. Standridge, either one. JeffStandridge.com, and I'm making some improvements to my website, but they'll both be available there. And I'm working on a blog now, doing a little bit of blog. Some of it's writings from the book, some of it's other writings. That's working on getting it incorporated into the website as well. So Amazon, JeffStandridge.com, arconductor.org, startupjunkie.com.
At arconductor on all the socials.
At arconductor on Facebook, @_ arconductor. Yeah, I'm not a tweeter.
Okay, cool.
So.
We'll include them all in the show notes. Thanks so much, Jeff.
Man, thank you. I appreciate you guys. I've had a great time.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
This has been the Startup Junkies podcast. Thank you for listening. Please rate us on iTunes if you enjoyed the show, because that definitely helps. And tune in next week for more stories of the startup founders of today and tomorrow.